Welcome. I'm Jeremiah Reiner, and this is the Deeply Rooted Podcast. Hey there, and welcome to the Deeply Rooted Podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Jeremiah Reiner of Calvary Bible Church. Thank you all, wherever you're at and however you may be listening. We appreciate the support. We're looking forward to our conversation here tonight as we're recording. We have with us Pastor Sean Morris out of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. He and his wife, Sarah, live there with their 4 children. He's the associate pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church. Sean is also the dean at the Blue Ridge Institute for Theological Education, which is also known as BRIGHT. Sean, welcome to the Deeply Rooted Podcast, brother.
Hey, brother, thanks so much for having me on. Glad to be here with you tonight.
Thank you so much. And really, the backdrop for everybody, just so you know why we've had Sean on this evening. Sean is going to be one of our guest speakers at the Deeply Rooted Conference coming up this November 10th and 11th. He's actually going to be speaking on the Friday night there on November 10th. So we're really excited about that, looking at the doctrine, like I said, of assurance. So if you already have tickets, be looking forward to that. If you don't, head on over to deeplyrootedpodcast.com. You can get all your tickets on there, and anybody under 18 is free. If you're in seminary or if you're a college student, we'll give you a discounted rate of $20 there. All you have to do is email us at deeplyrootedconference.com, and for all others, that'll be a rate of $39. So if you haven't signed up already and got your tickets, please do so. Just a little less than a month away. Really excited about that, but glad to have Sean on with us tonight. I'm looking over these notes here, and I feel like I'm reading a biography of somebody who's lived out the old Johnny Cash song, I've Been Everywhere, Man. I want to read these off, and I want you to explain, I guess maybe walk us through this, because this is impressive to me for a guy your age. You literally have been almost everywhere. So you grew up in North Kingsville, Ohio. You went to Grove City College in Pennsylvania. You got your MDiv at Reformed Theological Seminary out of Jackson, Mississippi. You have taught at West Africa Reformed Seminary in Gambia, Africa. You got a Master's of Theology at the University of Glasgow out of Scotland. You were the associate pastor of Westminster Presbyterian Church in Roanoke, Virginia. And you are currently pursuing a PhD at Puritan Reformed Theological Seminary in Grand Rapids, Michigan, all while living out of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. How does one man do that?
Well, I think he does it with, by the grace of God, by the sweetness of a supportive wife who's supportive of these endeavors, and by the sweetness of a supportive senior pastor and session of elders at these churches that have helped make it happen. So, I mean, now some of that may sound a little deceptive or misleading, certainly not intentionally. I did not live in Scotland. I did that degree stateside, so I just did it via distance. Now, I got to go to Scotland, blessedly, for several different times for a week-long, week of study or things like that, which was wonderful. I love any chance to go to Scotland.
Right.
Didn't live there. I did that out of when we were living in Virginia, so did that remotely, and teaching at the West Africa Reformed Seminary in the Gambia for the Presbyterian Church of Gambia. That was a 2-week stint of teaching some intensive classes, so getting to visit with those brethren and see some of the life and culture in Gambia, but didn't live there per se, just spent a couple weeks with them. But and then same thing with the PhD program through Puritan. It's a wonderful program, and one that can be done via distance through a modular format. So it's very accommodating to men who are in full-time ministry, missionaries, things like that.
Right. Now, you are not necessarily too far from here. Take me back about growing up in Ohio. What do you remember about that?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up, my parents, I think my grandparents on my father's side were from West Virginia coal mining territory, stock. And then I think my grandfather took a job with the railroad, and so they moved him north, closer to the shores of Lake Erie, because there's lots of shipping up and down the train tracks to the shipping yards to the Great Lakes, to back and forth for the mining fields in West Virginia and Kentucky. So that's what brought them north. So hence my father was born in that area, my mother too. And so I grew up on what we call America's snow belt, where, it is not uncommon to go to sleep one night with nothing on the ground in December, January, and to wake up the next morning with 3 or 4 feet of snow.
Wow.
To greet you, and life goes on. Schools don't get canceled. Stores don't close down. because every county has a fleet of 300 plow trucks, so life has to go on.
Was it very mountainous there where you grew up in that part of Ohio?
No, pretty flat. I mean, right along the lakeshore, it's pretty territory, but no, relatively flat. And if you go on the more southern end of the county, lots of farmland, flat fields, that kind of thing. So yeah, not overly mountainous, but the if I remember correctly, the phenomenon called lake effect snow only happens like 5 or 6 places on the planet. And that stretch of shoreline between Buffalo, New York, down to Cleveland, Ohio, is one of those 6 or 7 places in the world that gets lake effect snow.
So you were more than familiar with the Winter Wonderland.
Yes, that's exactly
Yeah.
right. I mean, going to college, undergrad at Grove City, Western Pennsylvania gets a fair amount of snow too, but Grove City is south enough that it's just outside of that lake effect snow band. And so even when they would get quote unquote heavy snowstorms, it still didn't feel quite as miserable as it would be where I grew up.
Now, did you spend a lot of time in Mississippi?
We were there for 4 years. My wife and I, we met at Grove City, got married there at the college chapel, and then just after getting married, we moved to Mississippi for seminary, so that I could pursue the MDiv program down there. So a lot of guys do it in 3 years. Guys like myself, if we have an internship at a local church, we'll take advantage of that and stretch out the time of study into 4 years. So that's what we did. So we spent a good solid 4 years in 2011, and we left in early 2015, living in Jackson, Mississippi. Yeah.
Did you grow up in a Presbyterian church, or were you even involved in church growing up at all?
Yeah, not Presbyterian,
Okay.
but I was something of a theological mutt growing up, is how I like to put it. My parents, we would, we would, we would. I don't think they'll listen to this podcast, so I think I can speak fairly freely. So I think they're the kind of folks that, unfortunately, when things would go south or things would not go their liking, they would church hop and go from one place to the next. And so, as a kid, we'd be in the Methodist church, we'd be in the Lutheran church, we'd be in the Baptist church, we'd be in the Pentecostal church, we were in the Church of Christ. We were just kind of all over. So I had a wide swath of experience in terms of theological and doctrinal exposure. But what got me into Presbyterianism was my junior high wood and metal shop teacher, of all people.
Wow.
A gentleman by the name of Ken Ayers. He was full-time there at the middle school, but he was also a part-time Presbyterian minister at this little country church about half an hour from where we lived. And it was PCUSA, so in the mainline denomination, but he
Right.
was rather conservative for that denomination. And so he became a mentor to me. We started going to his church, and he really took me under his wing. And I think in those years, that's when I started to feel a sense of call to ministry. There was another, and it was actually probably closer to 45 minutes. It was more of a 45-minute drive. And so as we got to know some of the other Presbyterian churches in the area, we discovered another church, which was only about 15 minutes from our house, also had a pretty conservative minister, good, fairly traditional ministry there. And so when I was in high school, started going to that congregation, the First Presbyterian Church of Ashtabula, Ohio. And that gentleman, who's now gone home to be with the Lord, Stephen Long, he also greatly mentored me, took me under his wing, introduced me to Reformed theology through men like R.C. Sproul, things like that.
Yeah.
And his son, Joshua, who is also a Presbyterian minister now, his son had gone to Grove City College, and he thought very well of it. He thought very highly of it. So he steered me in that direction. So after high school, that's where I went for my undergrad studies. And then at Grove City, there was just a pile of men in the theology department, on the theology faculty, who were Reformed and Presbyterian, ARP ministers, PCA ministers, things like that. So those became my influences. Those became my mentors. And then I quickly realized that a denomination like the PCA would be a much better fit for me, given my theological convictions, than the mainline church. So while I was there in college, I joined a local PCA congregation and began the process of studying for the ministry to be in this denomination, the Presbyterian Church in America.
Now, going back to that junior high experience, would you say that's probably around your conversion, or would you think that happened before that?
I think that I was converted around age 11, attending a church youth camp. Now there wasn't any altar call, there wasn't any sort of emotionally,
Sure.
manipulative sort of experience that happened. But I think that a week of constant Bible teaching and Christian fellowship and just solid exposure to the Word of God and lots of devotional worship services and things like that in the evening, I think I just came home a Christian. I finally realized what the gospel was, what Christ's death and resurrection meant for a sinner like me. And so when I came home from that camp, and if I was age 11, that would have been August of, let me do the math here. That would have been around 2000 or 2001, if I'm not mistaken. I came home a believer, and maybe it was either 99 or 2000, because I think at age 13 was when we discovered that little country Peace USA church with Pastor Ken Ayers, and I would have been at age 13, and that would have been post 9/11. So if that was 2002, going with Pastor Ken Ayers, then I think I was converted then around 2000, maybe 99. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Good deal. Now, you mentioned almost sensing a feel to call to ministry early on in your life. When did that actually come to fruition? Do you remember when you actually entered the ministry itself?
Yeah, I mean, probably around age 13 is when I first sensed a sense of call, in the sense of, I was growing by God's grace so much, by leaps and bounds in my faith. I was just reading my Bible all the time, devouring any theological books I can get my hands on, watching sermons on TV, which I was pretty indiscriminate, so I probably got some bad theology from various TV preachers. But if it was a preacher with a Bible on the television, I'd watch it. This was I guess it wasn't technically the early days of the internet, but the early days before everyone really had a personal computer, and
right.
there was a ton of internet resources, so I wasn't doing too much in that regard. But so I was growing in the faith, growing in Christ, and just sitting there in church one day, listening to Pastor Ken preach, it just dawned on me. I think in my 13-year-old mind, I said something like, wow, you can do this for a living. You get to study the Bible for a living, for a career. I think that's how my mind put it. So I just started talking to Ken and say, what's involved with being a minister? What do you have to do? I figure you have to go to college. What's beyond that? And so he started to walk me through that. And if you can believe it, my little 13-year-old self, I would tag along with him to boring old things like Presbyterian meetings and see what happened there with the business of the regional church and different folks coming under care of Presbyterian, going through the rigors, leading up to ordination and things like that. So, yeah, so he explained to me that, generally, the Presbyterian church has historically valued a highly educated ministry. So he said you should prepare yourself to do 4 years of undergrad and then another 3 years of graduate level study, seminary, and then you'll be ordainable. Now, that won't automatically ordain you, but you'll be ordainable potentially. So then you still have to do things like church internships and sustain exams and trials from the presbytery, receive a call from a local congregation. But those are the things that'll be involved with you being a minister one day, if that's really what the Lord is calling you to. So, yeah, so that's what I did. That's what I had in mind for the rest of high school. And then when I went off to undergrad, it was with a view towards, all right, let's do some early years of theological study, and then after that, it's off to seminary to do further advanced theological study to prepare for the ministry. Yeah.
Now, where did you meet Sarah along the way?
Well, I met her at Grove City, and I did so by way of dating her roommate.
The tried and true method of finding a wife. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. I may have, there's that terrible old Seinfeld episode where they talk about the roommate swap.
Oh.
I may be the one man who has successfully pulled off the roommate swap and lived to tell the tale.
You're also my new favorite guest for dropping a Seinfeld reference while on the Deeply Rooted podcast. So you just went above every other person I think we've had.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So you guys met there.
Sarah's
yeah.
roommate, she ended up being the maid of honor at our wedding. So it was one of those things where you go out on a couple of dates and everything's friendly and cordial and amicable, but you just realize we're not really clicking. It's fine. So we're not going to waste each other's time. So we part amicably, but in the process, I realized that she had a pretty cute and a pretty friendly roommate, and there's no harm in maybe grabbing coffee with her one of these days. So one thing led to another, and so now, we got engaged, and her roommate was the maid of honor at our wedding, and that was we got married January 8th of 2011. So, yeah.
Now, the real question I think burning on everybody's heart right now is, did Sarah's roommate end up with your roommate that you might have been with at the time?
No, she did
okay.
not. She ended up going on to she was a music major just like Sarah was, and she went on to do graduate studies, I think, at Notre Dame, and she married the man who's who's now her husband, and they're in a conservative Lutheran church. And now Sarah was in her wedding, but
Okay.
yeah, she did not end up marrying my college roommate, who's another fellow entirely.
No double switch. Yeah, we were.
No, we don't have that claim to fame. That's right.
Talk to me about, and I always love talking to ministers about this because I'm not going to say this is kind of inside baseball, but I do think you're going to know what I mean here. Balancing life, ministry, family. Talk to us a little bit about how difficult that is and some of the highs of that as well.
Yeah. I think that it can be done. I think that it simply requires a lot of discipline from the outset, and the commitment to keep a disciplined schedule as best as you can. Now, there's always going to be things that pop up. There's always going to be, a meeting that has to happen in the
Right.
evenings, for example, or there might be an emergency where you need to go visit so-and-so at the hospital, or you need to go be with a family because they just lost a loved one and you want to go pray with them and grieve with them a little bit, things like that. But on the whole, I heard someone say years ago, and I can't remember if it was in college or in seminary, and it may have been someone famous and it may have not been someone famous. I can't recall exactly, but he said that in general, he tried to structure his days as, and I think he put it like this: he give his mornings to God, give his afternoons to the church, and give his evenings to his family. That was the general way he tried to pattern his day. So get up early, spend time with the Lord in the Word and in prayer, get to business, in your work, meeting with folks, doing discipleship with the men in your congregation, getting to work on your sermon prep, your Sunday school prep, your Wednesday night prep, whatever that looks like. Be disciplined during your day as best you can, and that way get on home. That way you can help your wife with the kiddos for supper time and bath time if you're married and have a family and you have children and that kind of thing. And that way you're in your kid's life. And again, there's always going to be interruptions that happen from time to time, but in general, with the majority, if you can keep that kind of healthy pattern,
Right.
all the best. And for me, I've been, like I said, I've been blessed to have a supportive session and supportive senior pastors, where because I've been doing further studies along the way, both at the THM level and the PhD level, and so I admire the guys, especially who are solo pastors, who are doing this kind of thing. Whereas I've not been a solo pastor, I've been on a small staff, and so we're able to share the load so that if he's preaching, for example, Sunday morning, I'll be preaching Sunday evening, but neither of us have two sermons to prepare for the week. So that means I have some spare time during the week to maybe crank through some PhD work, do some reading, do some writing. I'm able to do some of that during the daytime hours. Sometimes I got to do it in the evening as well, and that requires discipline because it can be very tempting, to have supper, sing and pray with your kids and tuck them into bed and kiss them goodnight, and then all right, now they're off to bed. It's 8:30. Let's have some downtime and turn on the TV and just unwind a little bit. And you can do that, but maybe you can't do that every night, even though you want to do that every night to unwind. And it's like, you know what? I would like to relax, but I've got to get through this essay that's due in a couple of weeks, or I've got to get through this reading, and I got to discipline myself that instead of watching TV from 8:30 to 10:30, it's time to be reading and writing from 8:30 to 10:30. And so if one can be disciplined and have a plan on the front end, I think, by the grace of God and with the support of godly elders, a person can balance these kind of things. But I would not be able to do it without the support of my wife, because she handles
Right.
everything in our home. I can imagine that maybe it might be doable if I were a single man, but being a married man and being a father, I'm utterly dependent on my wonderful wife, who's able to take care of the things in our home that need taking care of, so that I'm free to do the labors of ministry and free to do a few extracurricular things and free to do these further studies with the liberty that I am. So I don't know that I have any secret insight, but that's my secret sauce, at least.
Well, I think that's a great answer. Discipline and what you said there, I think this goes to one of many reasons, but plurality of elders. There are multiple benefits to that clearly in Scripture, but like you said, there are some very practical parts of that as well that often get overlooked. So I appreciate that answer. Any lessons that stand out in particular about maybe marriage or parenting that you've picked up along the way?
What I'm trying to phrase it in my mind. It's not unique to me. I'm just parroting what a mentor and a professor said to a bunch of us guys early on in seminary. But basically, what he said is, gentlemen, the habits that you form now will be the habits that follow you into ministry. In other words, don't expect that you're just going to slough off and slack off now and then think, okay, but once I get ordained, And once I'm in a church position, then I'm going to cultivate these good habits, and then I'm going to cultivate this more rigorous pattern. He goes, no, whatever habits you form now during these seminary years, those will be the habits that follow you through into the ministry. So if you're not in the habit of getting up in the morning and reading the Bible, you're not going to just one day magically pop up and start doing it. Or if you read your Bible at the end of the night, I mean, different folks have different rhythms that work for them. But if you're not in the habit of regularly reading the Word now, you're not going to just magically start doing it post-ordination. If you're not in the habit of regularly praying with your wife now, what makes you think you're just going to magically start doing it after you're ordained, or once you have kids, and then your schedule really gets thrown into miniature chaos? If you're not regularly in the habit of trying to cultivate time for devotions now, you think it's going to get any easier when you have 1, 2, 3, 4 kiddos running around, and you have all these grand intentions of sitting down and having these devotionals, but people are, there's bare naked babies crawling down the hallway, and there's somebody screaming in the kitchen, and suddenly there's this bizarre oozing slime that magically appear on the wall, and you had these grand intentions of singing Psalm 100 and reading through Matthew Henry's commentary, but you're gonna have to adjust on the fly and see if you can get some semblance of a prayer uttered before everyone gets down to bed.
Amen to that. Let's move in a little bit to pastoral ministry itself, and transition out of, I guess, family life here. But highs and lows of pastoring, there's a lot of them. Particularly for you, I want to go way back, because I always love asking this question to guys. Do you remember the first sermon that you ever preached?
Yes, and I can only imagine how dreadful it was looking back. But I think, if I remember correctly, I would have been about 13 or 14.
Oh, wow.
That little country Presbyterian church. And I think Pastor Ken, with the permission of the elders, of course, but I think it was, I'm going to be out of town this weekend. Young Sean here is contemplating the ministry. Why don't we give him an opportunity to just try it out? And so I think one of the elders led the service, and I gave a 20, 25-minute sermonette of some sort. And I'm sure that it was rambly, and I'm sure that it was full of personal stories and all kinds of unpolished, uninformed, ignorant theological pontifications. But I remember the congregation being sweet and encouraging and appreciative. And as I went through high school, there were various other summertime kind of opportunities to get to do that, to fill in as a guest from time to time, usually with the understanding of this is a young man who's preparing to go off to do theological studies. He's working and pursuing toward the seminary. So it's not just, let him have an exercise of vanity. This is towards the goal, the end of something useful. But so I think probably around 13, multiple opportunities in high school, and then further opportunities certainly during college and seminary years.
What about and I love asking this one as well, strangest place that you've ever preached?
The strangest place there might be a tie there.
Okay.
And I'll try to say this as discreetly as possible. So this was a couple of small country churches in rural Mississippi, and the one church, this was full of sweet people. It was just hilarious. I married a Southerner. I grew up a Yankee. I think I've become something of a naturalized Southerner, having lived in the South for approaching 15 years. All 4 of my children have been born in the American South and so forth. But coming fresh out of Yankee land, going into rural Mississippi to preach at this little country church, sweet little old lady comes up to my wife afterwards and says, "Your husband, that was a marvelous sermon that he gave, but where is he from? Is he from Wales? Is he from England? He's just got the strangest accent." We're in thick backwoods Mississippi. So the fact that the dear woman couldn't even identify a man who was for the northern part of her same country of the United States, that gives you some semblance there. So that was one. And then the other experience might have been another country church in rural Mississippi, where I was the regular student supply preacher, but I wasn't ordained. I wasn't the real pastor, but I was just regularly filling the pulpit for this little church that, couldn't afford a full-time pastor or anything like that. They would usually rely on seminary students to fill in for them. And I didn't realize what sort of tensions or backstory that I was stepping into. And I don't know what happened that day, but all I know is we got down there for the 11 o'clock service, get there about 10:45 or so, and a couple people meet us at the door. Turns out the lead elder and the lead deacon had a major falling out in
Oh,
that same morning, just minutes ago, and the elder stormed off, and he had just left. He wasn't even there for the service at all. Oh, okay, all right. Well, I get up and I lead the service and I preach the sermon, and everything's pretty standard. And then we get to the end, and I think I prayed the closing prayer of the sermon, getting ready to announce the closing song, and the deacon gets up out of his seat and walks to the front. I don't know what he's about to do. I mean, he doesn't look hostile. I don't know what's happening. He's interrupting the midst of the service when we're supposed to be closing down, and before we get to the closing hymn, he turns around and announces to the congregation that because of the falling out that he had with Elder so-and-so a few minutes ago, that he's taking a, quote, sabbatical from church, and he was asking us all to pray for him as he took this sabbatical from church. And I didn't know what that meant. And I'm just a young, wet behind the ears seminarian. I have zero real pastoral experience. And he just makes that announcement and then sits down, and everyone's just staring at me like, what do I say? Do I condone this? Do I rebuke this? How do I gloss it over? And so I just bumbled around and said something to the effect of, well, we want to pray for our deacon friend as he goes through this difficult time, and ask that the Lord would minister to him. And let's use our closing song here as a prayer. We'll use these words as a prayer for him and a prayer for this church. And I'm thinking, good night, just get me out of here and back on the road.
Yeah.
What is this place? And that congregation ended up being just so sweet to this young seminarian, and there were some interpersonal issues, but by God's grace, a lot of those folks worked through them. But I just wasn't prepared for that. I'm a guy that was used to decorum. I was in more mainline churches where everything's very prim and proper, and larger churches. And so being in this small country rural church where maybe I guess the decorum could be easily cast aside when necessary, it just threw me for a loop. I didn't know what to do with that. So that was probably the most awkward, bizarre, and uncomfortable experience I've had. I've had other awkward experiences that were funny, but that one was probably the most uncomfortable.
Yeah, when church goes wrong is not a seminary class, but it probably needs to be.
Yeah, that's right. The funny things that come to mind are more like preaching this little country church where there is no musician, there's no pianist or band or anything like that. So you're just singing a cappella the best you can, and
Yep.
then you've got brother so and so off to the left, and I mean, I was a music major, so I can carry a tune pretty well, and he's just over here singing his heart out, and he's half a step higher, and so he's flat, and it's just throwing everybody off key, and no one knows what's happening. And you know what? You just power through it, and that's fine. But just what can prepare you for that? Well, nothing really. You just got to live it.
The good old days.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to close out here with one question before we get into our one of our favorite things to do is some rapid fire with you in just a moment. But you've mentioned some really good mentors that you had along the way. What about those that you may not have met? And what I mean by that is maybe some more prominent names throughout church history that have really benefited your life and ministry. Does anybody come to mind there that you've really gleaned from over the years?
Robert Murray McShane.
Yeah.
So obviously he died in 1840, maybe not obviously, but he died in 1843. So no chance of me meeting him in the flesh, but
Sure.
I look forward to meeting him in glory. But he died at age 29, so he did not leave behind a ton of written works because he died so young. But the written works that he did leave behind, I encourage folks. I mean, people are somewhat familiar with Robert Murray McShane's Bible reading plan through the year, but if they can get a hold of his biography, if they can get a hold of a handful of his sermons and letters and devotional journal reflections that he left behind, I think most of those are available from Banner of Truth, and they're pretty affordable. Check them out. I think the thing that strikes me there is that there's encouragement for all kinds of ordinary pastors and ministers, because when you read his sermons, they're rather plain. They're rather ordinary. They're not exactly mind-blowingly wonderful, but to know that the Lord used those very plain, ordinary, simple sermons and preaching of the word so effectively to such great blessing as he labored there at St. Peter's Church in Dundee, it really is remarkable. And I think, if you will, the secret sauce, for want of a better phrase, behind that is because of his close communion with the Lord, his prayer life, his devotional life, his meditating on the word day and night like the man of Psalm 1, his real sense of wanting to strive after holiness. Those things and his reflections on those things have what impacted me and sort of mentored me from afar, chronologically speaking. They've just left a real impact on the way I think about life and ministry and the Christian life. And to know that what's the famous phrase of his, that it is not so much great talents that God blesses as it is great likeness to Jesus.
Mm.
A holy minister is an awful or awesome weapon in the hand of God. And that's just stuck with me. It is not so much great talents that God blesses, but great likeness to Jesus. And so if I want to be useful for the kingdom, if I want to be useful for God's glory, and I do, I think, on my best days, I can say that sincerely, it's not so much me honing some impressive skill that's going to wow people. It's about a closer communion and a closer likeness to the Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a great pick, by the way. McShaney, like you said, if you haven't done so, try to read his biography. That would be a great read for you, and I think a real faith booster to a lot of people that might not be familiar with who that man really is. Mm-hmm. All right, now for the tough stuff. We want to run through these here. So 10 of them right off the top here, as quick as we can go, and if you don't have an answer, make one up. So
okay, great. We can do that.
Yeah. All right, number one, what's your favorite meal?
Filet mignon.
Oh, nice. Most used commentary when you study?
Most used commentary. It's probably a tie between Calvin's commentary on that particular book of the Bible or Matthew Henry's commentary.
Okay. Last vacation you went on?
Last vacation went on. We took the boys, well, all of our kiddos, to North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina earlier this summer.
Nice. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Attaboy. What's your favorite hymn?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I mean, it's rapid fire, so first one that comes to mind, For All the Saints.
Oh, nice. Okay.
My wife came down the aisle at our wedding to that hymn, and we sang it as a congregation. So
wow.
That one's got a special place in our hearts.
Yeah, that's neat. I like asking this one, and I'll keep it short and sweet. And you don't have to elaborate if you don't want to. But if you do, you're welcome to. But would you rather officiate a funeral or a wedding?
I'm pausing only because I like officiating both. I've done both. And I'm just trying to decide which one I really would prefer. I think my heart is just generally inclined toward funeral, so I'll say funeral. And
I'm actually in the same camp, and some people don't understand that. But I said, until I guess you've done both, I think you know where I'm coming from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's because even though you might have godly couples and godly families in either situation, and I think of godly couples at weddings who are happy to hear the word preached and the promises of Christ expounded. Nevertheless, there's this kind of there's the ceremony, and we're just so excited to start life together, and we're going to get off to the party, and it's easy to get distracted by all the excitement, the palpable excitement of new life together, and it can be the case that everyone's just there and they're just buzzing and they're happy and they're not really maybe the most reflective or sober-minded. But obviously there's something about death that forces us to be reflective and somber and sober-minded. And I think in those moments, a gospel minister really has a prime opportunity to minister grace and proclaim Christ, even when the deceased may not have been a believer. There's still a real opportunity to minister grace and minister the peace of Christ that passes understanding to a grieving family in the most tender of moments. There's something special there about a family that welcomes you into that most kind of intimate and familiar of situations, and you have that opportunity. A captive audience, and I'm not sure if that's the fairest expression to use, but there's something like that of we're here, we're thinking about death, we're thinking about the things of eternity, and we've got no hope other than the hope of the gospel. And guess what, buddy? We want you to talk about it for about 20 minutes. So off we go.
I think on its own merits, and this is just personal opinion, I think it's the greatest opportunity to proclaim the gospel and seeds really get into decent soil. Because people are thinking about things that really matter at that point. But again, that's just me. But yeah, I agree with you there. Back to certainly lighthearted. So, pancakes or waffles?
If you would have asked me that maybe a year ago, I probably would have said pancakes, but I think waffles.
What changed your mind?
I don't know. I've just been kind of on a Belgian waffle kick. I think it's because my wife got a Belgian waffle maker, a waffle iron, and so we've been putting that to good use. So And I took a trip to Belgium about a year ago to visit a missionary friend. Of course, that's the land,
Oh
the
yeah,
land of the Belgian waffle. So they've become nearer and dearer to my heart.
can't blame you there. All right, if you were stranded on a deserted island, what's one candy you'd have to have?
Mm, Probably the one that has been my favorite ever since I was a boy, just the good old Milky Way.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Cold or lukewarm?
For the candy bar,
Yeah.
lukewarm.
Okay. I know a lot of people like their candy bars cold, so just
Oh,
thought I'd throw
is
that
is
out.
that a thing? I mean, I know there's like frozen like ice cream versions of Twix or Snickers or Milky Way, but people will take the candy bar itself and just put it in the freezer to chill it.
I'm a diehard, lifelong fan of Reese cups in the refrigerator first. Like, I think
Okay.
it's the proper etiquette. I
Okay.
have
All right. See,
no rhyme
I
or reason
learned.
to that, but I'll go to my grave on that one.
All right. I learned something new. I've just always been a room temperature
Yeah,
guy, so
maybe
I
not
didn't.
Milky Way. I haven't tried that, but I would be curious. So
All
maybe
right.
you can be the guinea pig for us. Yeah. All right, two more here. And I know you've mentioned McShane, but maybe you could even pick a book of the Bible if you prefer. But what's the most impactful book on your life that you've ever read?
Hmm. Boy, that is a tough one. I mean, I could almost give a different answer for every stage. As a college man, it might have been The Holiness of God by R.C. Sproul.
Mm,
As a pre-seminarian, it might have been Knowing God by J.I. Packer. I, Last few years, it might have, thinking through the ramifications of legalism versus antinomianism, it might have been Sinclair Ferguson's The Whole Christ, or it might have been kind of the predecessor volume, The Marrow of Modern Divinity, possibly. Mm, 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 mm.
all of those would be good, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe honestly, the biography of John Knox by Jane Dawson,
Okay.
because that's what I'm doing my PhD research on now is John Knox, and so kind of the McShane Scottish Presbyterianism led me down the path toward Knoxian Scottish Presbyterianism, and then I started reading the biography on Knox probably 2015, 2016. Fast forward by about 4 years, now I'm in the midst of PhD research on the man, so maybe that one's a good contender.
Yeah, we'll take that one. That's a good one. And then the last one here. Do you have a favorite passage in the Bible?
Lots of ones that I love. If I could cheat, I guess I'd have to pick maybe a chapter and just say Romans 8.
Okay.
Romans chapter 8, that's just chock full of the promises that are so sweet to so many believers.
Yeah, that's a good pick. Yeah. Well, on that note, you've survived. So there we have 10 rapid fire questions, and you've came out the other side. So he's not sweating too bad, by the way, for those who can't see. So I
That's
think
right.
we brought him through all right. Hey,
Live to tell the tale.
exactly. A couple of quick things here. We appreciate you coming on so much and taking time out of your schedule to be a part of the Deeply Rooted podcast. Thank you for a great conversation. A lot of wisdom, some good smiles and lightheartedness, but it's really been rich tonight. I appreciate that. Real quick, I want to let everybody know about where you all attend services and how they might be able to be a part of that if they're in the Oak Ridge, Tennessee area around there. So would you explain name of church, location, and times and things like that for our audience?
Yeah, certainly. I'm one of the ministers at Covenant Presbyterian Church in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. We are part of the PCA denomination, the Presbyterian Church in America. If you're familiar, if folks are familiar at all with the Knoxville area, Oak Ridge is sort of to the northwest of Knoxville. Our church is located right on the south entrance to town. If you're driving northbound into town and you cross into the city line, you look up on a hill on a bluff, and there's this church with a steeple overlooking. That's us. We're right up there. But you can find more information about us at covenant-pca.com. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. And our services are at 10:55. That's when the announcements begin. So you're kind of your traditional 11 o'clock hour Sunday morning, 5:55, or your traditional 6 o'clock hour on Sunday evening. And we'd love anyone who's visiting the area or anyone who's in the area and looking for a good, solid Bible preaching, Jesus Christ exalting congregation. We'd love to have you come visit us and worship with us sometime and get to know us.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as getting in touch with you, maybe somebody wants to speak with you, prayer, something along those lines. Do you have an email or social media presence that people can follow you at?
Yeah, absolutely. If they're on Facebook, they can just, I think it's facebook.com/Sean G. Morris, G for my middle initial. I think that's right. If they are on Twitter, or I guess it's called X now, but it will always be
X.
Twitter in my heart. I can't speak for
Same,
anybody
yeah,
else.
same here. Yeah.
It'll always be Twitter in my heart. They can just find me on Twitter at Mr. Sean G. Morris, and by all means, feel free to get in touch with me there. Send a direct message, and would love to connect with you and be of any help that I can be.
And an email address, what would be best there?
Let me think here. Sean CPC Oak Ridge. So that's the name for my work email address. Sean SEAN CPC for Covenant Presbyterian Church Oak Ridge at gmail.com.
Well, thank you so much for all that information. And like I said, Sean is going to be speaking for us Friday night at our Deeply Rooted Conference. Again, that's November 10th and 11th. He'll be there on November 10th speaking that evening. If you haven't registered, again, make sure you do so, deeplyrootedpodcast.com. You can get your tickets there. You can also check out all of our archived episodes there. That'll lead you directly to our YouTube link. And if you haven't done so, you can also subscribe on Apple Podcast as well. Make sure to hit that like button if you would. And you could also leave us a review. That would help us out greatly, getting the word out to other people. You can find us on Facebook. You can follow me personally if you'd like to on Facebook as well, and on, as Sean said, Twitter to us, X to all these new people out there. I'm on there as well. I'm not as elaborate. It's as really difficult to find. It's simply at Jeremiah Reiner. So appreciate you so much, Sean, for being on. Anything you want to say about the Deeply Rooted Conference ahead of time?
Well, I'm looking forward to being with everyone up there. I'm looking forward to meeting new friends, new brothers and sisters in Christ, and I think that it should be a treat, and I hope that it's an encouragement to people's souls. We're thinking about the perennially relevant topic of the doctrine of assurance, something that a lot of Christians either misunderstand, as maybe a sense of something that a lot of Christians don't have, but so earnestly want. And so I trust that all the messages are going to minister to people's needs, and hopefully folks come away by what we talk about.
Yeah. If you want to let the cat out of the bag, maybe a little teaser about what you might be speaking on that evening?
Oh, sure. Be glad to. Keeping with the conference theme, my agenda, my goal is simply to talk about the doctrine of assurance by way of the Exodus and the Passover lamb, how believers can have assurance on account of the objective reality of the shed blood of the lamb.
Good stuff. Looking forward to hearing that. Thank you again. And like always, folks, hope you have a great week in Jesus.